I once again will be reading the nominees for the Goodreads Choice Awards in the horror category. Oh my gosh, I'm worried about this list. This is not horror. Absolutely not horror. The scare factor, unfortunately, is a 0 for me. This is all just very indicative of how my last 2 days have felt. 5 stars. Holy. This video is going very well. I finished another 5-star book today. Today's the day we find out the top 10. I didn't see that coming. Is it possible for me to read all of the top 20? Hello friends, it's Kayla. I once again will be reading the nominees for the Goodreads Choice Awards in the horror category. If you don't know how it works, at the end of October we get our first round of voting. There are 15 selections and you can vote for anyone you want, and then you can also write in votes. The next round there will be 20, which takes the initial 15 and then adds 5 ones that were written in the most. Then the whole thing gets knocked down to 10 and then we vote and there's a winner. My goal in this video is to read the top 10, but we won't know that for like a month. So I'm gonna start reading as soon as those initial 15 get announced, and then I'll tell you all of my thoughts. We're still a couple weeks out from the first round, so I wanted to give my predictions here. So my initial 15 include, obviously Stephen King is gonna be in there. I think we're gonna see The Final Girl Support Group and Book of Accidents, which I'm moderately interested to read. I hope we'll see My Heart is a Chainsaw by Stephen Graham Jones and The Death of Jane Lawrence by Caitlin Starling, because these are my Literally Dead book club, mystery thriller horror book club I run. These are our selections for October and November. I will already be reading them regardless of the awards, so I hope they're in there. That's also true for The Last House on Needless Street by Katrina Ward. I'm reading this for the book troop. And then 2 I've already read, so I hope they're in there, are Night Bitch by Rachel Yoder and A Touch of Jen by Beth Morgan, even though I didn't like them. My highest hopes for books that I'll get to read are Nothing But Blackened Teeth and Reprieve. These are 2 that I am much anticipating. I also hope When the Reckoning Comes is on there, because I really want to read that. I've actually borrowed that from the library and returned it like twice already this year. And then I am curious about a few if they'll make it in. I feel like All's Well has the potential of being considered horror. I also imagine Summer Suns being in there, and then Goddess of Filth maybe. And then Goodreads also says that significant re-releases can sometimes make it into the awards. So that potentially means that like Pearl and The Between could end up in the awards. So those are my basic predictions. I'm sure there are so many horror books out there that I've never even heard of, or books that I've heard of but didn't know they were horror, which is what happened last year. I am gonna start to gather some more of these books that I've predicted, so at the end of October we can react to the 15 announcement, and I can get started on my reading. Okay, the Goodreads horror nominees are up. They're different this year. There is 20 initial ones. There's no write-ins this year. There isn't like 3 different rounds. It's just gonna happen twice. We get 20 nominees, we get to vote, it gets knocked down to 10, and then we vote again, and the winners will be announced December 9th. Which means there will be no surprise books that come up later, but it makes this video less fun. And it's gonna be hard to pick which books I start with, but let's find out what the initial 20 are. Oh my gosh. Okay, we've got Later by Stephen King, which I did expect and I have at the ready. I've never heard of The Hollows. I've never heard of The Whispering Dead. I have heard of Near the Bone, but I haven't picked it up. Oh my gosh, I'm worried about this list. Okay, we've got The Last House on Needless Street, which first book on the list that I have already read and finished. We have something called Come With Me. We have Chasing the Boogeyman, which I have heard of. We have This Thing Between Us, which I have heard of. That's one of the ones I considered mentioning in my predictions, but I didn't know enough about it to really consider it. Same with Near the Bone. Like, I knew these existed and I was thinking of them as like books that could get write-ins that I didn't think were the most popular horror of the year, but clearly I was mistaken. We've got All's Well, which I've read. The Final Girl Support Group. Bloodline, don't know it. Where They Wait, don't know it, but I know that author. Okay, Summer Suns, I have read. The Drowning Kind, did not know that was horror. Cackle, do not want to read. When the Reckoning Comes is exciting. That's another one that I have ready. How many was that already? There's only one more layer. Oh my gosh. We haven't seen Jane Lawrence yet. Haven't seen Reprieve. Haven't seen The Book of Accidents. Haven't seen My Heart is a Chainsaw. Maybe those will be the 4. The other Stephen King was on the mystery shelf. Okay, My Heart is a Chainsaw and The Book of Accidents. And then Comfort Me with Apples, which I have heard of. I actually didn't think that was out. I've seen people talk about it, but I think that I thought it was like an upcoming read for 2022 maybe. And then A Dowry of Blood, which some of my friends have read recently, and I didn't think it'd be for me, but it's here. I definitely understand why these two aren't in there. I will be reading them anyway, but like I wish that I could have read them for this. And the fact that there's not write-ins, like that was an opportunity for those to maybe pop up. I don't know what the top 10 are gonna be, and this is all I have to choose from. Like normally there's a selection and then there's some write-ins, so if I wasn't totally interested in that selection, I also have some more options later with the write-ins, but that's just not a thing. So basically here's my predictions for 15, and here's the ones I was right about, here's the ones that I was wrong about, and now I have to re-finagle my whole graphic to fit in the top 20. Of these 20, I have read these ones, I expected these ones, and I'm ready to read them. These ones I wasn't expecting just because I didn't know enough about them. Let's just get like a general idea of what's happening here. The Hollows, it's set in the woods, love that. It's eerie, whispers in the trees. Oh my god, we have a podcaster. Okay. The Whispering Dead is the first book in a series. This is like a pretty classic horror thing that I don't really read a lot. Set in a cemetery, ghosts. Near the Bone is one that is on my want to read already, and it's about something that's crying in the night, and it's like a dread-inducing survival story in the mountains. Come With Me. It's haunted by her absence, her ghost, embarks on a journey. Is this a road trip? Dark secrets being revealed, consumed by his obsession. So it seems like realistic. Chasing the Boogeyman. Several missing girls, mutilated bodies are discovered. There's a serial killer. This Thing Between Us didn't... I've read this synopsis before, but I wasn't like fully convinced. It's an existential horror. We're in a secluded cabin. It's about grief and loneliness. So I'm down. I've actually specifically been avoiding horror this year. Like this is something I'm not going to do in the future, but I've been holding off on so many horror that I've been interested in because I wanted to read it like for this specific video. So I see like some of my friends have already read it and rated it, and like I'm jealous. Then we have Bloodline, which like sounds like a vampire story. Inspired by real events. Okay, maybe not. Pregnant journalist, picture perfect village, an archaic organization. Sinister secret of a little boy who vanished. Where They Wait. We've got another like newspaper journalist guy returning to his hometown. Nightmares, whispers. Then we have The Drowning Kind by Jennifer McMahon. Oh, I've been told I will like The Invited. I've been told about Winter People. Okay, yeah, this just looks like a... Doesn't this look like a historical fiction or something? Social worker, 9 missed calls from her sister, dead at their grandmother's estate. Diving deeper into the research. Oh, so it is historical. Interesting. Yeah, this sounds boring, but okay. Oh, it's got good ratings. Then we have Cackle. It is going to be about witches, which is like fine because the rest of it has been pretty realistic. It just seems like too fun to me. Like it looks like a fun horror, which is not something that I feel like I look for. Then we've got Comfort Me with Apples. The perfect husband. They live together in Arcadia Gardens. He works too much. He misses her. Okay, the synopsis is written in a way that makes me think the book itself is going to try to like do something. Like it's not just going to be a straightforward linear story. Sophia wonders about things, strange things, dark things, blah, 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 blah. Oh, it's a novella. Oh no, 1 star. And then lastly, A Dowry of Blood. This is a reimagining of Dracula's Brides, which isn't something that I would have been seeking out. Definitely thought this would be in the fantasy category, if anything. You know what? It has good ratings, so who knows? And I think it's short. I don't have much time to get started. Oh my gosh. Okay, it is first thing in the morning the following day, and I need to go pick up all the books. So I have my list, and I'm going to stop at a couple bookstores. I don't think it's realistic to order any of these off the internet because there's been massive flooding in BC, and the connection between Vancouver and me has been severed. But we're just going to get what we can get and see what happens. I think realistically, we need to like get a ranking going. So probably 15 books. That's my prediction. It's not my goal. My goal is the top 10, but since I've already read 4 books and there's probably some that I'm interested in that aren't gonna make the top 10, I'm gonna say 15 books are gonna end up read by the end of this video. Right now I've already read 4, so I guess I'm gonna put my favorite one, which is My Heart is a Chainsaw by Stephen Graham Jones, at the very top. That was definitely a 5-star, top of the list of books that are my favorites this year. And then All's Well, I gave 3.5 stars, so we'll pop that somewhere in the middle. Summer Suns, I gave 2.5 stars. And The House on Needless Street, I think I gave 3 stars. So they are now in there, but I'm sure they'll move around as I read more books. So today, I'm starting with Later by Stephen King, just because I have the audiobook and I have to return it to the library like tomorrow. So I will properly review the 4 that I've already read, but this one I haven't even read the synopsis. It says we're following the son of a single mother. He just wants an ordinary childhood, but he's born with the unnatural ability that his mom urges him to keep a secret. Jamie can see what no one else can see and learn what no one else can learn. Then an NYPD detective draws him into the pursuit of a killer. So some people have said this is more of a thriller. I read the first couple pages and I really like the narration style. It's very clearly a ghost story, a paranormal story. And he introduces it talking about how like he thinks this is a horror story, so get ready. Okay, 3 stops later, I bought pretty much the last copy in every single store of every single thing, but I found like a good amount of stuff, and I just realized this is from the author of The Return, which I DNF'd last year, so scared for me. Look at me go! I'm also really, really enjoying Later, which I'm kind of surprised by. Though that's pretty typical with me and Stephen King. Like, I read so much Stephen King. I've read almost every Stephen King. Loved him growing up, but as an adult, every time I pick up one of his books, like, it doesn't do anything amazing. Like, it's never gonna be in my favorites of the year. So I guess I go into them with, like, low expectations and it's not gonna be a new favorite. But every single time I rate it, like, 4 or 5 stars. All right, that was an easy, quick, one-day read. I enjoyed the audiobook just as much as the physical book. And it's my favorite of the hard case crime like series. My memory's not great with these ones, but I do think this is the most supernatural of the bunch, which is probably why it got a 4-star and the other ones got 3s. I love this perfect mix of like realistic thriller crime stuff with the supernatural. So our main character can see dead people. In my last video, I gave rankings out of 5 emojis for different elements that I look for in a horror book. So there's a scare factor. I'm gonna give it a 1. That's not a bad rating. I don't think this book is set up to scare you. Like, there's not jump scares. It's not that style of book. For the unsettling factor, I'll give it a 2, because hearing the descriptions of the dead people, hearing the way that they communicate, seeing how Jamie is perceiving them is a little bit unsettling. And then I also have a category that's just weirdness. So as far as a scale from, is this set in reality or is this just completely bonkers, I also have to give it a pretty low weirdness rank. And then I also have a ranking for intrigue, because for me to fully love a horror book, I feel like it has to also be saying something beyond just like, hey, here's this scary thing, look at this scary thing. I would say there's some interesting commentary on death, maybe a couple other things you could pinpoint. So like a 1 or a 2. So obviously you can see from these categories and the scales, if you didn't watch last year's video, this like isn't an accumulation. I'm not combining these emojis and then ending up with a rating. They're just things that I hope will help guide you if you're looking for a certain type of horror. The reason this was a 4 and not a 5 is I wish there were more mysteries. I wish this was longer, or maybe I actually would read this if it was like a trilogy. I just wanted a little bit more of everything, a little bit more time to get to know the people in Jamie's life, a little bit more mystery, a little bit more scare factor, and the ending of this is kind of stupid. Not stupid as in unbelievable, but stupid as in like unnecessary. Stephen King frequently throws in a random ending to his books. Sometimes it's a fun gimmick, sometimes it just seems unnecessary, and I think this book could stand on its own without that little twist. Now let me show you all the books that I have collected. Here they are, 17 of the 20. So from my already existing book collection, I had All's Well, The Last House on Needless Street, My Heart is a Chainsaw, and Summer Suns. Then from the library, I grabbed the Book of Accidents. They had The Drowning Kind, Bloodline, Later, and When the Reckoning Comes. And then I picked up Final Girl Support Group, Where They Wait, Cackle, Chasing the Boogeyman, Come For Me with Apples, Come With Me, Near the Bone, and This Thing Between Us. So I'm missing The Whispering Dead, A Dowry of Blood, and The Hollow. But I think those are all available via audio. And then there's a couple of these that the library also has available as an audiobook. So this is feeling like a big stack, but I'm feeling excited. Though I don't have the highest expectations of these three ending up in the top 10, I am reading all of them next. I just filmed a video yesterday where I wanted to read one book in one day and review it and do a spoiler-filled discussion in that video. It was an Instagram controls my day type of video, so I made a post with the shortest books that I had on my TBR listed, and the one that got the most votes was Come For Me with Apples, so I ended up reading this. Okay, Come For Me with Apples one. That is the shortest one. I think I'll probably end up listening to half of it on audio and half like for the rest of the day. Physically, I mean. I haven't actually fully read the synopsis of the book, but the first chapter was like talking about this perfect residence that they live in. All the people are perfect and you're only allowed to paint your house the color of mother's milk or virgin white. So I think it's like a interesting Stepford Wives vibe, or we could be going in a totally different direction. This like writing style is definitely right up my alley. It's like this sense of foreboding because it says things like, later on she would think back on this time as something like beautiful or simple, so you know that some shit's gonna go down. And now I'm halfway into both of these, so these will be the next two that I review. But this one I loved. I loved it so much. I gave it 5 stars. I'm just having such a better reading time than I think I had last year. Something that I've noticed though is I think this year the Goodreads horror nominees are overall more realistic fiction than otherwise. A lot of the horrors seem to be more ambiguous, more just a general ominous vibe, like slightly paranormal, you know, there's real life killers, as opposed to like monsters and demons and that like overt horror stuff. This is such a short book that describing it is challenging, but it's about a woman in a very controlling environment, and she is slowly recognizing how strange it is. So she thinks her life is perfect, her husband is perfect, she lives in this like gated community where everything is decided for her. The only thing she's not allowed to do is go into her own basement. It's one of those books that is very clear with its intent, and this helped me figure out something that I love in horror, which is if we're going for my rankings, scare factor is pretty much a 1. Unsettling factor for me is a 3, and I'll tell you why. I love when horror books have horrific things happening, but they're perceived either by the main character or the entire cast of characters as just being normal. That's something that I find unsettling. So there's obviously horror where like terrible things are happening and the characters are reacting to it as if they're horrifying. But for me, I get more freaked out when they're horrifying things and they're just like mundane activities to everybody in the book. So there were a couple scenes where like no neighbor was reacting to something that was going on, and I was like, I don't like it. Like I said last year, like if we're comparing to you know, realistic fiction, a YA contemporary romance, obviously this gets a 5 for weirdness. But in the scope of horror, I'm gonna give it a 2. And then for intrigue, I'm gonna put it at a 3. And that's intrigue outside of the horrifying things going on. What other conversations are we having? What is being referenced? What is the book trying to say? I think there's some interesting conversations that could arise from this. If you have no interest in reading it, but you want to know exactly what goes on, I have that video with all the spoilers. Okay, I need to do this update quickly because I'm about to go live. I'm all set up for a fun drinking night. I had to pour my wine and I'm going to finish when the reckoning comes during this live. But I finished another 5-star book today. I can't believe it. I don't know what the heck I'm gonna do with this whole thing. I think My Heart is a Chainsaw is still #1. And then, I don't know. I think I'm gonna put this in the 3rd spot. This is really just my type of horror. I know I just said that about the last book I read, I think. You can't call this overtly zombie horror or demon horror or possession horror or ghost horror, but it does exist like in that vibe. This is a story about grief. We're following a widower. His wife recently passed and the book is written mostly to her. So he's like telling her stories and reliving their experiences they had together. Right before her death, they had some weird things going on around the house. Like their Alexa would order weird things. It would turn on and off at weird times, and they started to research the person who used to live there before them. And then his wife unexpectedly passes. And I love books about grief, and that where grief is really manifested and also gets into like how everybody handles grief differently. So first, for the scare factor, I'm gonna give it a 2 because like it went there a little bit, but it was more unsettling than scary. So unsettling is a 3 for me. There were a couple scenes. If you don't know what this is on the cover, that's a dog. Just so you're prepared. No spoilers. Weirdness, a 3 as well. And then intrigue is a 4. The insertion of grief-related conversations and really talking about how like everyone in his life is now interacting with him, and how people will like create their own narrative surrounding a person or turn like the mundane details they know about someone or the few experiences they had with someone as defining features about them. So he basically goes and moves into the middle of nowhere so he doesn't have to deal with seeing his apartment every day, talking to these people who he feels like don't understand what he's really going through or didn't understand his wife. So it also talks a lot about loneliness and also talks a lot about culture. He's Mexican American and has a lot to say about his experience and shares things and learns things, and there's conversations about like folklore. I think the ending will absolutely divide people. A lot of times this genre is a descent into madness, and it's really chaotic and just a out of body kind of experience. The writing style is very stream of consciousness. It feels like a fever dream. So when people end up disappointed by endings, a lot of times I don't really understand it, because I feel like that would be just like not true to the story itself if it all wrapped up in this neat little bow and like had pages of explanation. I understand why people might want that, but this is my preference. So I am gonna go drink a lot of wine and probably not be able to come back to you coherently. So I will update you tomorrow on how the rest of this went. I'm about 1/3 of the way in right now, and it's slow moving, and I'm waiting for something to happen, but I think once it does, it's gonna be good. Okay, drank a lot last night, had a lot of fun. It was like a 7-hour live show. And we had a couple good reading sprints in there, but I definitely had to wrap this up this morning. Once the plot really picked up at like the halfway point, it definitely had a great pace to it, kept my attention. It was a pretty quick read. And I really overall respect the pace, because I've said before, I love when a book perfectly pairs real life horrors with supernatural horrors, and this did that flawlessly. If you're looking for a book that has truly frightening realities and also has like a haunting ghost element to it. I think this just like does it perfectly. I think you're going to get exactly what you're looking for. There's a lot of historical context in here. The book takes place on a plantation, and our main character is revisiting the plantation for the first time since like her childhood, where we know that something went on, but we don't know the full truth of that moment in her life and Jesse's life, who is like her best friend. They're both friends with this girl named Celine, who in their adulthood, she invites them to her wedding, which is on the plantation. And she doesn't acknowledge why that would be a problem, both in just like for her friendship, for people in general, or for remembering what happened to them in the past as children on this land, or what they saw, or whatever happened that they have refused to speak about since then. Mira arrives. It has been turned into this like resort. There are people who have been hired to do reenactments, and then suddenly someone at the wedding has gone missing, and things just really take off from there. There's a lot of conversations about current day oppression, racism they're experiencing, what they experienced as children, and we also get stories like from the ghosts who are haunting this area from further back in time. I think this is, like I said, exactly the book that you're expecting it to be. I'm giving it a 4. I think I could have enjoyed it more if there were more surprising elements. And there are a couple different plot points that, with how short this book was, I feel like just stopped. And I wanted a little bit more of certain relationships, certain experiences, because I wasn't completely satisfied with the explanations of every single thing. For intrigue, this is without a doubt a 4. The scare factor, once you pair everything together, there can be scary things as far as you as a reader being scared by. Definitely had that. And then also acknowledging like what's scary to the characters and what would be scary to experience in real life. I'm going to give it a higher rating on the scare factor than the unsettling factor. This does feel like a pretty traditional ghost story. It's a great ghost story. It's a complex ghost story. But with the realities that are faced in here, weirdness has to be pretty low. So this one will go right here. And at this point, I have read 8. My goal being reading the top 10. It's like, oh my god, how cool. I've read 8. But I don't actually think I have touched the top 10 very much. So I need to stop fucking around and reading just like what sounds interesting, the shortest thing, try to get as many read as I can, and focus on what's going to be in that top 10, because we're only a week away from finding out what that is. Say you're a vampire and you're burning in the light. I have read 2 things since I saw you last. First, you know what it is because I just showed you. It's a Dowry of Blood. I don't actually know the author's name or anything else that they've written. S.T. Gibson. It's about Dracula's brides. It's from the perspective of Constanza. I've read a couple things since reading this, and now I can't really remember how everything was pronounced in the audiobook. The audiobook is 5 stars. The book itself I'm giving 4, but like if you want to read this book, I would highly recommend the audiobook. It is so dramatic. Basically, she's writing a letter to she's writing a letter to a vampire who's unnamed, which is something that I absolutely love in books because it just says so much about like what the story is trying to do just by leaving out a character name. Either it's like because we're in a world where women like don't have autonomy, or we're in like a situation, a relationship, whatever, where she just has no control, so she doesn't even get named, and it just says so much. But in this one, the man doesn't get named, and I love it because it's like her taking control of her own story, and it's about like an abusive relationship, so she's just taking the power from him by not naming him and making the story about him. It's such an interesting look at the inner workings of their relationship, so I'm gonna give it like a 4 for intrigue. Some different people become involved in their relationship, and that's when she like needs to change what they're doing, and her perspective changes a little bit. In theory, I like a vampire story because there's something so interesting about like becoming a vampire and having someone turn you into a vampire. Like because a lot of times there isn't consent involved. And I just think that's such an interesting conversation about like the power dynamics and the control and like saving someone or deciding someone else's fate. For weirdness, I mean, it's a vampire story, so I'm gonna have to give it above a, I think I'm gonna give it a 2. 0 for, a 1 for the scare factor, I guess. And a 2 for unsettling. Just because of the nature of the storytelling style, you never really knew what was gonna happen. Even though it was her like reflecting on things, there was an uneasiness that I definitely felt. I picked this one and the next one. I guess let's do a little title screen. Because these were the 2 books, Near the Bone, you just saw it, Christina Henry. Christina Henry's written a lot of things. She's always been on my radar, but I've never picked something up from her. So I'm glad that this is the thing that forced me to pick up from her, because I'll be reading more. 5 stars. Holy shit. This video is going very well. But I really wanted to pick up these 2 right now because in case they don't make the top 10, these are the 2 books that I think the most amount of people want me to read. Like, they'll be the most disappointed if I don't get to by the end. They're 2 of the ones that have the highest ratings from my friends. And also they seem to be some of the most like objectively horror. I know that A Dowry of Blood is more like fantasy, but as far as like creatures and supernatural or paranormal elements that are very well described and explored, I feel like these 2 books might be that. I'm just rereading the, oh, I just picked up The Ghost Tree actually. I was just rereading the synopsis to make sure I didn't give anything away, and it said praise for the Ghost Tree. I just bought that. Anyway, like A Dowry of Blood, this is about a woman in a relationship that is not good. She's in a cabin in the woods and she must never make her husband William upset. They lived alone on the mountaintop forever. She is in a very controlling situation, and then she finds something in the woods, and then there are like some strangers who also come into the woods. They're like hunting something, trying to find something. There's rumors of something in the woods, and she can't let William know that she saw these people or talked to these people or whatever, because he will get angry. Let me tell you, this does not hold back with its depictions of gore and horror. I keep thinking of the books that I would like compare these ones to that I read in the last year's awards. So like A Dowry of Blood is most similar to the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. This one I feel like is probably the closest to Devolution, but I would most recommend it to like fans of things like Bird Box, A Quiet Place, and like The Mist. None of those are identical to this at all, and I'm sure there's actually like movies and books that I am just not thinking of that are more similar. But just like the vibe of the general ominous, something's happening outside and I need to survive it. This is probably one of the scariest horrors I've read, so I'm gonna give it a 3. It was tense. There were slow parts. There were like that perfect pairing where nothing is happening and it's very quiet and slow, and then something happens out of nowhere. Also a 3 for unsettling, because I was just worried and creeped out and freaked out for a good portion of this. Intrigue outside of the actual horror elements is probably like a 1, just because I feel like you know what's up. This is more like if I was talking about mystery and thriller books, I would say this is more mystery than thriller, or thriller than mystery. I know this is horror, so that's not the conversation, but this is more like thriller vibes than mystery vibes. It's not like, oh, I wonder, I wonder, I wonder. I feel like you get the general idea pretty quickly, and then it's just a race to the end. I digress. What's next? Weirdness. I think a 2 feels right. Even if I do feel like there's explicit horror things, they're still not like weird. So that's that. Having a great time. Okay, quick update today. I think I'm gonna finish the Book of Accidents today because I'm halfway through currently, and I'm doing a live show with reading sprints. I feel like the only way I'm going to complete this entire TBR is if I have my entirety of the internet holding me accountable. So I'm probably gonna do some reading sprints a couple times a week for the next couple weeks. It's at a point where I feel like it could wrap up. We have this family who just moved to a new town, and there's this thing in horror that a lot of people seem to love where we're following a teenage boy and then one or more of his parents. And that has never been something that I've ended up loving. So this one is just like going fine. There's this book of accidents that the boy, he meets this boy who's not really a boy. I don't really know what's up with him, but we're slowly finding out what's up with him. And he has this book of accidents that's full of all of these deaths. And he has like this thing he's trying to accomplish. I obviously don't want to give anything away, but they're just kind of like seeing things and trying to figure out if this sinister energy surrounding them is real or if it's in their minds. A lot has happened. We're finding out a lot of things. And I feel like this is typically in a book where like the big fight scene happens and then everything ends, but we still have 50% of the book to go. So I'm gonna do some reading sprints, hopefully wrap this up today. We just had a reveal that is big, so I finished it, and I really appreciate Erin for hanging out with me for 5 hours to get our reading done. She's also trying to read like 30 books in 30 days, so we will probably be doing some more sprints to help us get through our TBRs. Unfortunately, this was like there's no like new ideas, right? So there's nothing wrong with this being something I've read before, but this is really not anything groundbreaking, which is fine, and not every book has to be. But for it not being anything like new and especially interesting or taking like a new take on anything, I needed at least to feel scared or excited or anxious or something, and I just felt nothing. I was definitely expecting more of a spooky haunted house story, and I respect that this wanted to take a different angle at the family in a haunted house story. But what I really look for in a horror is something that is tension filled, that is fast paced, that is ambiguous and strange, and just like is always keeping me interested. And when you have a 500-page book, it's just not gonna happen. So the first half was just okay for me, and then it completely changed tones, and I was ready for it to do something else, but I didn't like where it went. The scare factor for me was a 1, just because it's so much more different realities and fantasy, and that's not something that scares me. For unsettling, I'll give it a 2, because there were a lot of scenes with eyeballs, and I don't fuck with eyeballs. As far as weirdness, I'll give it some respect with a 2. And intrigue is like a 3. I think we covered some interesting topics. Entropy and trauma and generational trauma and some different like kind of science fiction-y elements that are an interesting concept. I think the general idea of good versus evil in a book is something that's intriguing, but not what I was particularly looking for with this one, I guess. And the thing is, timing could definitely be at play here, because if I had read this book when I was 17 and I had been reading a couple other things that were similar to this and enjoyed them, might I have enjoyed this? Perhaps. So I know that all my feelings are obviously subjective, but I especially feel it in this one. And I do remain that following a boy child, that's not the right word. I don't mind following children, preteens and teens in an adult novel, but I was just thinking like there have been ones that I've enjoyed from a female perspective, so a male child perspective is not one that I think I've like ever loved in this genre and age range. I'm looking at my shelves. I don't think so, because like I didn't like Imaginary Friend. Definitely recommend this for fans of Imaginary Friend. I'm thinking about like The Whisper Man. I didn't love Inspection. I didn't love The Troop, and those are like groups of boys. The Ocean at the End of the Lane I didn't like. The Graveyard Book. I'm sure there are books that I have enjoyed. I just can't think of them, like books that I read in my adulthood. Anyway, it's not important. I'm moving on to the next book.
So let's ditch the movies, forget the ending, we don't
I'm in the same location as last time I talked to you. I'm doing the same thing as I was doing last time I talked to you, which is doing live reading sprints. I started a couple different books yesterday. I also needed to read my book club book, The Death of Jane Lawrence, which unfortunately wasn't on the Goodreads Choice Awards. That's fine. My rating, I probably wouldn't have put it there anyway, but anyway, today I'm reading The Final Girls Support Group, which has one of the, or the lowest average rating of any of the top 20, but has like the second most amount of readers, I think. So I would say if anything's likely to beat Stephen King, it's this one. So I definitely, like, it's gonna be in the top 10. And I love it so far. It reminds me of My Heart is a Chainsaw, which I'll talk to you next about because maybe I'll want to talk about their similarities. It's my favorite book on the list, like I said, so far, and they both have this theme surrounding like movies and slashers. And in My Heart is a Chainsaw, it talks so much about real movies and references so many movies, which is so fun. In this one, it references a couple key ones, but they have different names, but like you can tell which movies they're talking about. And they feature a whole bunch of like older women and the like mass murders that they've survived, and it's acting as though those movies were made into movies because they're like the real life stories of these women, you know, glorified versions of their stories. And it also talks about like taking charge of your life and your own story and like dictating how you're perceived. It's an interesting concept. I'm really liking it so far. I like these little moments. The audiobook though, like I'm listening to it mostly via audio because it is narrated by Adrienne King, who is from the Friday the 13th movies, which is just very cool. Her voice sounded so familiar, and I thought it's because she like had narrated a lot of audiobooks, but she hasn't, so it must be a memory from that movie. I don't know, unless she's done other things that I just don't know about. It's definitely more thriller than horror at this point, but I'm excited to see where it goes, and I think I'll finish it today. I read the first couple pages of my read, and one of the first scenes is like these women getting together and they're sitting around talking about how they're final girls, and it talks about like one of the women and how she has like red lipstick on her Starbucks cup, and I was like I don't like that. Are you? I just cut my finger and then dented my desk because I wanted to put this back on the wall so you knew about my subscriber count. You can't even get it back up. Every time I go on the computer, I like almost knock it off the wall, so I took it down. This is all just very indicative of how my last 2 days have felt. I haven't checked in with you in a minute because I haven't felt like putting myself together to vlog because I'm not having a great health/mental health time. I haven't felt up to doing much, but that has been good for my reading. So I read a couple things not for this challenge, and then I read these two, finished and read these two. Get it together, Kayla. Both of them were 3 stars, which is a bit of a bummer, but like I've been getting lots of reading done. That's pretty much all I've been doing, so that's good. It's funny because both of these I feel like started out as 5-star reads for me. This one, like, it's about final girls. It's called The Final Girls Support Group. I think I already told you what it's about, but the main character, her voice is, I think, very polarizing. Some people will enjoy her style of narration and some people won't. I love it. Generally just very passionate and opinionated, and I love that perspective. So it started out so well, and then I don't know what really happened. It turned into this like action adventure story, and all of her perspectives, opinions, actions did not align with the character that we were led to believe that she was. I also found it very difficult to differentiate all of the women in here, and I also found that in the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires that I read last year. I just feel like he doesn't build them in a really memorable way, like the setup of who they all are and how they're different from one another. Like at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter because there's just so many side characters, all of the final girls. But like I almost needed a character map to remind me who was from like what situation, and then also like what movie it tied to in real life, and then like what film franchise it was in the book, and then like all of the things that she's currently going through, because there'd be some like shocking moments, and I feel like they would have been more so if I even remembered like what I was supposed to know about each individual character. But my biggest struggle was with Lynette as the main character. Loved her. I feel like most of the reviews that I see don't like her at all, but the way that she's like built her life to protect herself, that is like the intrigue portion. I'm gonna give it a 3-star for intrigue because I like hearing about being a survivor and what your life looks like after that. There was discussions about like mental health and leaning on each other and like needing your group of women to support you. But she was so well established as a character who was in protection mode and was so good at staying safe and making all of these choices. And then things just fell apart with her personality and she started doing all these things that didn't make sense for her character. And I feel like that could work if it was more explicitly explained that like she was losing the ability to do so because of this and this, or if we got flashbacks, even better, of like maybe looking back on all the times that she thought that she was doing something to protect herself, or she thought she was doing the right thing, but she's almost an unreliable narrator, and like maybe we could have learned that things were happening behind the scenes that she like never even realized she was doing wrong. Anyway, it just got very ridiculous, and I love an over-the-top book. Things happened to her like 5 different times and she kept just like trucking on through really unrealistically. And it's not supposed to be a realistic story. Horror typically isn't trying to be realistic fiction. It started out so fun and then it just got uninteresting. So the scare factor, unfortunately, is a 0 for me. The unsettling factor, I'm gonna give it a 1 because there was like one scene where she went to someone's house and I was ready for it to be more unsettling. And weirdness, I'm also gonna give like a 0 or a 1. This wasn't all I expected it to be or all that I thought it would be as I started. It just really declined in my interest as it went on. And 3 is not a bad rating. I would still recommend it to some people, but it's just okay.
I've seen the look you give me, and it's a silent killer.
I also gave a 3 to The Drowning Kind by Jennifer McMahon. I think I will pick up The Winter People. There's another one that people have recommended to me. Let me know if you think that they're like so similar that if I gave this 3 stars and like maybe you think this is her best, the other ones maybe aren't worth it, and I would probably give the same rating. But this kind of reminded me of Summer Suns, which I know I will still talk about. I'm so sorry I haven't talked about the ones I've already read yet. In that we have a character who has somebody close to them die, and then they are going through all of their research and starting to like take on their research themselves and learning about this paranormal situation. So we have dual timelines in here. We have this woman named Jax and her sister Lexi drowned apparently, but her sister was a super strong swimmer. There's no reason that should have happened, so she's going back to the place where it happened and finding out what's going on, because leading up to her death she was super like unhinged seemingly. She was texting everybody and saying like wild things that made no sense and talking about how there's like something in the pool. She's also a social worker, and I think there's some interesting conversations about like caring for yourself and recognizing things within yourself. So for intrigue, I'm gonna give this like a 3. I did find what we were talking about interesting, especially when you bring in the other timeline, which is from like 1929, where there is another woman and she just discovers this spring that supposedly can like make all your wishes come true. But as we know, typically, like every story ever, there is no like granting wishes without a price. She desperately wants to get pregnant, and we're following her and her husband on that journey and the things that happen to them because of the spring that they come into contact with. So for unsettling, I'm gonna give it like a 2. Water itself is an unsettling concept. Like, there can be anything under the water. It does say that it's a modern ghost story, so the idea of something being in the water is like an unsettling vibe. There are some scenes that I was like, oh god, but not as many as I hoped, and I hoped for it to go further than it did. The scare factor is probably gonna be a 1 for me, not too scary. And then weirdness, maybe a 2. Anytime you introduce something supernatural, paranormal, you're leaving the realm of reality. Whatever I gave When the Reckoning Comes, I feel like I would also have to give this. The idea of the supernatural, paranormal, ghosts is inherently like not realistic and a little bit weird, but as expected, it felt just a lot like a historical familial novel. So I don't know where I'm popping them in my list, but I'll show it here. Editing me has figured all of this out. We're now less than 48 hours until the top 10 is announced. I don't know that I'll read anything more before we get there, but I will talk to you about my predictions, and I will pop in with my review of the 4 that I already read. We finally got a change of scenery for a clip today. You're not gonna be able to see this while you're sitting here, but just like imagine you're looking at this the whole time that I'm talking. I'm out running some errands today. I just stopped at the library to pick up a book for my mom and a book for me. I have to stop at quite a few other places that would be boring to tell you about. So I brought my stack of books so I can update you on these without sitting in the same spot I've been sitting in for every clip of this entire video. Don't mind the green post-its. That's just to remind me of my stack, what I've read and what I haven't, because there's a lot of books there. So I just wanted to quickly categorize these and run through them. You already know my ratings for them. And what's fun is I actually have like a dedicated video to each one of them. Actually, I guess this has 2 dedicated videos. All's Well by Mona Awad was my most anticipated book of the entire year. So I had it in my 5-star predictions of the year and I made a video about it. And then I also picked it for the Literally Dead Book Club and we did a live show for it. My expectations of Mona Awad are too high at this point. It was Shakespeare inspired. It's about a woman dealing with chronic pain. It has a very weird, ominous tone. She meets these strangers. They offer her like the ability to make her pain known to others. It gets super weird. It's like a fever dream. Intrigue's definitely pretty high for me, probably a 4. I think the idea of talking about the challenges that a woman deals with in life, whether it be physically or like mentally at work, the pressures on you, the expectations of you, and in her situation, you know, people not believing her pain. It was all very interesting. Scary's a 0. Unsettling is probably a 2, but I'm going to give it a 3 for weirdness to balance out those 2 together. A story that has a character who's like descending into madness or the inability to tell dreams from reality, whether it be like something that's actually happening or something that's in their mind. It's always an intriguing premise. And like I said in my live show and I think my video, it's hard for me to pin down exactly what didn't work for me, but the general pace of it and wanting things to go deeper and darker, that's where I'm at with All's Well. My Heart is a Chainsaw was also equally much anticipated. I have given every Stephen Graham Jones 4 or 5 stars. And this one sounded like something that would be right up my alley. It's following a character who's just obsessed with the slasher genre. And there's a whole bunch of movie references. And the synopsis I remember being a little bit vague, but just about a girl who believes that a slasher is taking place where she lives and she has to do something. I didn't know what that something was, whether it be saving her town or finding the killer or like how she was going to participate in the whole thing. I didn't know what it was going to be, and it was my perfect horror book. It's a very slow burn. I often reference this alongside When No One Is Watching by Alyssa Cole, which is a really slow burn thriller, because I think they both get really like typical of the genre. It just takes a while to get there, and you have to really enjoy the main character's like narration style to enjoy the book as a whole, because it's so character focused. Lucky for me, I did. I'm absolutely obsessed with this book. I love Jade as a main character. This is in like my top 20 books of all time. She's very obsessive. She's very neurotic. She goes on very long tangents. Every person she meets, she just wants to talk about slashers and how they're built. And then when she sees little inklings of people around her, like, oh, you're the stereotypical final girl, you're clearly this, this, and this, she casts people in these different roles in her head. There's also like essays in here where she really dives into movie culture, and it's just so good and so interesting. Intrigue's a 5. Weirdness, it does get there. You just have to be patient. This really is a pace that I enjoy, so I'm gonna give it a 3 for weirdness, a 3 for unsettling, because there are some scenes that are just, I feel like you're partially confused as a reader, like you don't really know what's real. Things aren't fully explained. Everything feels a little bit vague, like you don't fully know who's in the room or what's really responsible for what, and that's a feeling I enjoy. The scare factor, oh, it's probably a 1. There are a couple scenes where I was tense, but that's it. So there's also a live show discussing that one, and then we've got a live show on someone else's channel discussing The Last House on Needless Street, which I say in the live show that this is a very difficult book to explain, to try to review with full spoilers. Absolutely, which is why I love doing the live show. But just pitching it to someone, I can't give you more than just the synopsis, which is there's a house at the end of the street. There's a man, there's a teenage girl, and there's a cat, and we read from all of their perspectives. There's also a missing girl, and our main character, the man, back in the day was slightly seen as perhaps the person responsible for the little girl going missing. This book I feel like could end up pretty high on the list at the very end, because if this is your first time reading this type of twist, I think it can really do a lot for you. And the people who I see absolutely loving this and talking about how it's a favorite of all time, I absolutely get it. It's had some good twists, some good reveals, some I saw coming, some I didn't. I think it takes tropes that I've seen before, but does them in a good, like, respectable way. The writing style is super weird, and because you're just lost for a lot of it, I have to put unsettling at like a 4. I don't know, this is like a gothic thriller, so it's very atmospheric and you feel like you are in this house, but it's not like spooky scary skeletons. It's just general uneasiness and weirdness. Intrigue is, I don't know. Weirdness, I'm not going to give a rating because I just don't feel good about using the word weird in reference to this. And lastly, another 5-star prediction of the year was Summer Suns by Leigh Mandelo, which isn't fair. Like, it's not fair for me to pick 5-star predictions when it's an author I've never read from before, but I did it anyway. And then I made a video reading it alongside another book. I've talked about before how this feels like fan fiction of, like, my favorite book. And I'm not going to use that as a reason for its poor rating. I just think generally paranormal stories, which is what I would consider this, are a complete hit or miss for me. They get really low ratings or really high ratings. We're following a guy who goes off to university. He was supposed to be there with his friend. His friend went there before him and has since died. He was doing a bunch of research into paranormal stuff. And then, who is it? When Andrew joins the school, he is like taking over Eddie's research, or like just finding out what he was really looking into and what he was getting up to while he was there, because there's a bunch of people who know him, who have a different like perception of him than Andrew does. Once again, it's a gothic story, and I've never given a book that pitches itself as a gothic story high ratings. Intrigue though was high for me. I wanted to know what was going on. There's also a lot of just real life conversations in here. There's a lot of like homophobia and misogyny that our characters have to navigate. It talks about grief, it talks about friendship. There's a lot of great conversation in here. It's just the actual plot itself and what we were up to in the story that I wasn't fully on board with. More often than not, when I read a paranormal story, I finish it saying, I wish this was less paranormal than it was, or I wish this was more paranormal than it was. It's a balance that is difficult to find done perfectly for my taste. Weirdness is a 2 because it's the same, just like ominous, ghosty, otherworldly situation. Scare factor is a 0, but I don't think it's supposed to be scary. Unsettling, I think it's supposed to make you feel just like nervous. It didn't give me that either, so I'm gonna give it like a 1, which is what I would also give most like YA paranormal books that I read, which is what this reminded me of. And that's those 4 ranked. Today's the day we find out the top 10. Before I get into that, I'm gonna quickly go over what I think will be in the top 10. If the awards was based purely on rating, A Dowry of Blood would actually take it. So this is it organized by rating. It goes A Dowry of Blood, Come With Me, The Whispering Dead, Chasing the Boogeyman. A lot I haven't read yet. And the lowest rated of the bunch are like My Heart is a Chainsaw, The Final Girl Support Group, and All's Well. If we take a look at readers, the list is completely different. So the most readers that a book has is obviously the Stephen King, as expected. And then one of the lowest rated ones, but one of the highest readerships, is The Final Girl Support Group. Then we've got Bloodline, Needless Street, Drowning Kind, Book of Accidents. The ones with the lowest readership are a lot of ones that only recently came out. So like Come For Me with Apples, This Thing Between Us, and Where They Wait. Readership is obviously a lot more important because it's based on actual votes. So I think that there is a couple books that have a low readership but a very high rating, that high rating could push them from like what could be 12th or 14th position like into the top 10. And I think that there's a couple in the top 10 with super low ratings that could get pushed, some of them not out of the top 10, but a couple maybe out of the top 10. So I don't have a top 10 prediction, but I do have a top 9 prediction. I think it will look like this. Later, The Final Girl Support Group, Bloodline, The Last House on Needless Street, The Drowning Kind, The Book of Accidents, The Hollows, Chasing the Boogeyman, and Dowry of Blood. And then I think that final spot could be taken by one with a high readership, My Heart is a Chainsaw, or Summer Suns with its high average rating could push it into the top 10. I could also see Near the Bone getting pushed into the top 10. So let's check it out. Let's have them both side by side just so I can tick them off as I go. Let's click horror. And oh, Cackle? I didn't see that coming. We've got, wait, I didn't have All's Well on there either. Oh no. Okay, let's just pop Summer Suns in there, pretend that was right. We got that one. Got that one. Oh, The Last House on Needless Street, Dowry of Blood. Oh, My Heart is a Chainsaw also made it. Okay, The Drowning Kind. Later, The Book of Accidents. So I was wrong about 3. Wait, I only have 1 I need to read. All I have to read to hit the top 10 is Cackle. So Cackle's readership does have it in the top 12, but I thought based on its rating, there was no way it was gonna make it in. Seeing as right behind it, as far as readers, is Near the Bone. And it was also in the exact same spot for rating, which means like it could have made it. This is kind of surprising just because All's Well has the lowest average rating, but a medium readership. So I didn't think there was any way that that would make it. The biggest surprise is The Hollows. I was kind of looking forward to checking that one out. But that's it, we have our top 10. So I guess I'm gonna go read Cackle, and then I'll get back to you with what I'm planning on doing from there. Okay, it's the next day. I have read another book since talking to you, and it's not the one that I was supposed to. But I'll talk to you about that in a second. I feel like I didn't fully acknowledge yesterday that this is like best scenario shit. The top 10 is out and there's only 1 book that I haven't read. Imagine I clicked on that and I had already read all the titles, and then I was like, oh, what do I do now? Also, my favorite 2021 horror made it to the top 10. Like, that's amazing. In fact, all 4 horror books that I read before the awards even started made it to the top 10. I could have waited until the top 10 was announced, and I probably could have read those remaining 6 like in this week by itself and probably could have gotten it done. Also, it's kind of cool that nothing has bumped this at this point, and there's one remaining title, and it's The Underdog, because I have such low expectations, and like, could this beat my favorite? It's like a battle at the end. So I'll talk to you more about this in a minute, but since obviously, being me, I was told what to read last night, I didn't pick it up, and I read the entirety of a different book. I really wanted to pick this up, Chasing the Boogeyman, Richard Chismar. It looks just like a thriller, a crime novel, and I was really excited because like that's my perfect scenario, is a crime book, but then it gets weird and horror-y. I have been avoiding like this exact conversation this entire video because talking about books in a category and claiming that they aren't in the right category, I just find that conversation oftentimes very frustrating, whether I'm having it myself or other people are having it, because it could really be said about so many books. Like, especially when we're talking about horror, they have elements of mystery, they have elements of fantasy, they have elements of sci-fi, like they're historical, or they have paranormal elements, or they have supernatural elements. Whatever's going on, it's hard to pin down horror sometimes. So I've just been trying to stay out of it completely, but I can't anymore because this is not horror. Absolutely not horror. Like every other book that I've read, I think there are elements of multiple things, but I accept the fact that they could be perceived as horror. This is not one. And I'm mad about it. It's a decent book. I gave it 3 stars, but this is a crime novel. And it's a super interesting setup because it's like metafiction, and this author wrote himself into the book. So for the first couple chapters I was reading and I was confused because there's like a foreword and then there's like an introduction. We start reading the book, but then like there's a book inside the book because it's all about how he wrote this book in the past about these crimes, and now he is revisiting the town and he's like an observer of all of the inner workings of this community. I didn't even read this to completion, and I don't read blurbs, so looking at them now is just very interesting because Stephen King called this chilling and scary, and in the description it talks about how he finds himself in his own horror story, and then it says it's the ultimate marriage between psychological horror and true crime. I just like absolutely don't agree. There are rumors that begin to spread that the evil stalking local teens is not entirely human, but then it goes on to tell you that it is human and the FBI is involved, and it's just an interesting story about a serial killer. There's lots of images. I would definitely recommend the physical book. There's interviews. It's broken up in a really good way. It was a 3-star for me. It was an average, middle of the road mystery, thriller, crime book. I think there were a lot of missed opportunities. Him writing himself into the book, he did very much remain an observer and felt like an unnecessary character to even have in the book, and I feel like there could have been more moments of him being more a part of his own story. And overall there was nothing like shocking. None of the reveals were oh my god moments. It was just a generally somewhat interesting story, and I wouldn't be harping on the fact that it's not horror in any other capacity, because like I don't care the books that I pick up what genre they fit into. It's just like I'm here to read horror. So that was a bummer. Scare factor, an absolute 0. For unsettling, it's also getting a 0. I swear it's a 0. I'm not just being salty about it. Weirdness is a 1 because there's like a unique writing style to it, and intrigue is a 3 because I think a book like this is inherently interesting because you want to find out, along with the journalist, like what's going to come out of the investigation. And any urge that I had to DNF it while reading was thwarted by the fact that I needed to like find out what was really going on. So as far as my rating scale, here's where I've popped it. Once I read Cackle today, actually give me a little intro screen. Let's talk about Cackle. Once I read this, I will have 5 books remaining, and no real motivation to read any of them. But there is part of me, of course, because I'm me, that's thinking, is it possible for me to read all of the top 20? Do I even want to read all of the top 20? Or should I cut this video off and start the rest of my TBR that I want to read? So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to finish this, and then of the 5 remaining, I'm going to read the first chapter of all of them, have a little mini try a chapter tag within this video, and then I will complete one of them. The reason the cackle is like at the bottom of my predictions is just because I said before, I think that it looks too fun. I don't typically like the silly fun Halloween movies that everyone else seems to, and this just gives me those vibes. Also, I've DNF'd Rachel Harrison before. Also, witches just in general are a hit or miss for me. Sometimes it's great, like last year with the Year of the Witching, and sometimes I just absolutely hate a witch book. So once again, I'm doing some reading sprints with a friend. We've got Molly here today, and we'll see how much of this I can get through. Time for reading sprints. I'm back in my pajamas. I've worn this same shirt in 3 different live shows. I am reading Cackle. I got 30 pages in. It's a very slow audiobook, so I'm going to speed it up. So far, it's okay. It's about like a 30-year-old woman who just is like ending a relationship and moving to a new place. So reading sprints went well. I'm a little significantly past halfway, and I can tell you right now this isn't going to be 5 stars. So like, we're done, the chart's done, we know what the favorite is. It's just a bit too bright for me. It gives me like Halloween Town, like goofy Halloween vibes. Annie is new to town. She just moved and is restarting her life, so there's a lot of like, you know, complaining and reminiscing on her past relationship. She's trying to move on, but she gets sucked into this world. Not an actual world, but there's this like older lady named Sophia who everyone in town is like scared of, but she basically like owns the town, and they're just spending a lot of time together, like all day, every day, sleepovers. Her house is a giant sprawling mansion, and she's just learning more and more about her. And yeah, it's okay. I finished it. I know I went into it with certain assumptions, but I promise I went into it with an open mind. I was ready to bite my tongue and tell you how much I loved it, but yeah, it was a 2. It's everything that I expected it to be, and it's not my type of thing. But I'm so glad that I read it. I'm so glad that I discovered this section of horror, because there are so many people who ask me for horror recommendations, but they like want to just get into it, and they don't want anything like scary or about murder or anything that will give them nightmares. And this is like such a safe Halloween-y horror book that I can recommend to people who everybody like, I don't want to say this is for like romance readers or contemporary readers, because I think that people who enjoy romance can also enjoy like super dark horror. People have range, I get that. But if you're just wanting to dabble in this genre and you typically read like light, happy stories to begin with, this is something that I think you could really enjoy. I haven't looked up anyone else's rating, so I don't actually, well, I know that people enjoyed it because it ended up, people voted for it. It's here. Obviously people enjoyed it. I just mean like my friends, I haven't looked at any reviews, so I don't know if people who read like me have enjoyed this. But the scare factor is a 0. The unsettling factor is a 0. Weirdness is a 1. It's like witchy, but not too witchy. Intrigue actually is a 0. Like, there was nothing that kept me reading this book and kept me wanting to like know what was going on, except for it being in this challenge. It's very heavy-handed with its intent. It's trying to tell a very clear story about, you know, like making your own choices and independence. I think that maybe the ending might go in a different direction than people are expecting, so perhaps that is an intriguing portion, but no, it has much intrigue as like a typical Hallmark movie has. That's not a diss, it's just a fact. It's 2 stars. I don't know if I said that. And that's it. We finished. We did it. I read the top 10 horror nominees. Oh, and that means I also hit 15. So this whole thing is full. Now, do I want to read one more and mess up my whole chart? I do. I really do. So tomorrow I'm gonna try a chapter of each one. All the ones that I have left, I feel like have such a similar like opening premise. They're like all following a journalist, a newspaper person who's like suddenly involved in a mystery. But I'll talk to you about that tomorrow. So today, a Dowry of Blood came in the mail, so I can take my photo of the top 10 that I do every year. So that's perfect timing. I also today found this in my TBR closet. So I have a lot of books on the shelf over here. This is where I keep most of the books that I most want to read. And then I tuck a lot of books back there that I don't know when I'm gonna get to. So I just like opened my closet and this was in there. So apparently I already bought this year. Sorry to the library for borrowing this for no reason. I'm wondering if I've already hauled it too, or if I was keeping it from you. Anyway, next thing happening today is I have to vote on the awards. There are just a couple days left of voting. So I'm gonna go ahead and vote for my favorite, which is My Heart is a Chainsaw, which you already know. Because of the top 10, not any of the other ones were 5 stars. I think this will inform people that I voted, which means everyone will know how this video went. But I am posting it before the announcement of the winners, just because like the timing of my content, I need to get this up because I'm starting a whole nother vlog like today. And in that vlog, I will make sure at the end, I think the timing is right in my head when they announce it versus when that vlog goes live, I will give a little like reaction to the actual winner and the entire like ranking in general. So even though I gave quite a few 4 and 5 stars out, none of them bumped My Heart is a Chainsaw by the end, and none of them made it to the final vote anyway. At least not the ones that I gave 5 stars. These are the 4-star ones. And these ones did make it. And today what I've been up to is I have read the first, not even chapter, I read the first like 5 chapters of most of the remaining 5. We have Where They Wait by Scott Carson. Okay, if I were to organize them based on which ones I thought I would probably want to continue and read for my 16th pick, I would have said The Hollows, I think, with Come With Me coming in 2nd spot. And then, I don't know, probably Bloodline, and then Where They Wait, and then The Whispering Dead. Just based on initial like synopsis and impression. Now that I've read the beginning of most of them, one of them I read a sample of. Sorry, let me get my thoughts in order here. I thought I was so interested in The Hollow and I thought I was gonna make it in the top 10 that I like bought it a while ago as an audiobook. But I listened to the first 2 chapters and I don't like it. I hate the narrator. So I was like, okay, well that's a bust. I will just pick up the ebook. But then as I continued listening to see if I was interested in the story, I really just don't like the main character's narration style. I hate the way that he's like talking about his daughter. He's not somebody that I would prefer to read from if given the choice. So this is about like him and his daughter going to this like remote cabin retreat thing, and he's just like putting her down constantly like in his own mind. And then he meets like these other parents and they like are putting their kids down, just saying things like, oh, kids these days, like, oh, she's having TikTok withdrawal, oh, she's so obsessed with this and this and she can't go 5 seconds without the internet. Just like typical older dad stuff. But then he like critiques the other parents for being that way, but he's still being that way like in his mind and to us as a reader. That's not my only issue. I just like, I don't like his whole air. Then I listened to a sample of The Whispering Dead. I've heard that this is a really unsatisfying first book in a series. The audiobook seemed fine, the 5-minute sample that was offered. I'm not particularly intrigued, and I would prefer to read something at this point in this whole process, something that's not paranormal and not crime based. Like that's my goal because I've read so much of it. In this one we have a character who's like hiding from someone in the woods. She's being chased. She's next to a graveyard. I don't know much more, and I'm not saying I'm not interested in it, but I think what I'll do is I'll wait until the sequel comes out, see what people say about that one, and then perhaps read the series together. Then I read the beginning of Bloodline, and it's just not doing anything for me. The author's note introduced this story of like a missing child, like a real story. And the book itself is set in 1968, I think it was. And I still don't know how it's going to tie together with the missing child, because right now we're just following a woman who, we get like this little flash forward at the beginning where she wakes up and she doesn't have her baby, like she's given birth and doesn't like remember it. Now we're back when she first moves to this new town with her husband. Don't really know like what the tone is going to be of this or where the focus is going to be. It could be fine, but right now it's not doing as much as some other ones are. Next, I have Come With Me by Ronald Malfi, and this one just seems too similar to things that I've read already for this challenge. There's a man, he's writing the book like to his dead wife and discussing her death, and I think it's like the ghost of his wife. I don't know if that's real or imaginary. There was a shooter, and I don't know if it's going to turn into like solving a crime, but when I look at my friends' reviews, just like quickly perusing, people say this is much more a crime book than a horror book. But I did buy that, so I'm gonna hold on to it, and whatever book I don't pick, people are gonna be like, oh, I wish you had read that. So unexpectedly, this is the one that I am interested in. This doesn't pull me in. It looks like a vampire story to me, and I'm now realizing that I look like her. This one just seemed to be the most different because we have a man. He is like a newspaper researcher, journalist, and he doesn't really have any new opportunities, so he ends up going back to his hometown. Such a trope in crime and horror. And he gets involved with this man and woman CEO and the COO of a tech company, and there's something about dreams that they're doing. And it was just a very strange introduction. I actually read the first 5 chapters of this one. The chapters are very short, so I'm only on page 50. Doesn't this have like the lowest amount of readers, or one of the lowest? So not many people have read it, reviewed it. The synopsis calls it a haunting thriller, which I'm just now seeing, which is a little disappointing. And then it also calls it a creepy techno chiller, according to Paul Tremblay. But I don't know if I trust that guy, because his books that are called horror, I often don't feel are horror. Anyway, I'm gonna read this today. It's the longest one. I'm a little over halfway, and I am so glad I decided to read one more book. There was part of me that was like, I don't want to finish this video out with a 2-star read. But obviously there's the risk that whatever the next book was could be a low rating too. I don't think so. I'm really liking where this is going. We just had an interesting reveal that like explains a couple scenes that were already set up, which is just great. Intrigue is already a 5-star. Like, I'm so fascinated by the research involved with this app and this dream situation, and it gets dark. Not dark like gory or gruesome at all, if you're not into that kind of thing, but just like intense things are happening. I feel like I can't give you much more information because the book doesn't go in lots of different directions. Like, we're very much focused on this one thing and slowly finding out things about this one thing. So talking about any of the plot would ruin the book. My final rating for this is a 4. If you like a science fiction thriller and you want to get into horror, I think this is a good transition, a good combination of elements. I can't believe this is my final clip. This is so weird. I think I will read more from Scott Carson, or whatever his real name is, Michael something. He's written other things. This is a pen name. But it was interesting. It was fun. Scare factor's a 2. Unsettling's a 2. Weirdness is a 3. There's this concept I really like where it's like kind of a chain of events, or you see multiple people react to the same kind of scenario. That's something I always find really fun, and it was interesting in here. Again, I really can't tell you any more of the plot besides like there's an app, there's death involved, there's dreams involved. It definitely could have gotten more weird, especially if you like paired the writing style itself with the weirdness that was going on. Like, I love when how the character is feeling is really reflected in the writing, but I always felt like he was well explaining what he was going through, so it wasn't like this immersive foggy atmosphere, even though the town itself was foggy. A 4-star because I just really respect that this kept itself small, like close-knit. A story like this, when you're dealing with technology and science-y explanations of things, a lot of times a book like this will get global and it will be like the entire world is now affected by this thing, and I don't like when books do that typically, so I'm glad that this stayed what it was. Let me give you a look at my final ranking. I'll put it right here. I hope this matches this. I just decided like my final ranking right now, so it might not actually match, but my battery's about to die, so I'm just gonna hold it up and we're gonna go over it. Cackle was a 2, The Book of Accidents and Summer Suns was a 2.5. Chasing the Boogeyman and The Drowning Kind were 3s. The Final Girl Support Group, All's Well, and The Last House on Needless Street were 3.5s. Where They Wait, A Dowry of Blood, When the Reckoning Comes, and Later were all 4 stars. And Near the Bone, This Thing Between Us, Come From Me with Apples, and My Heart is a Chainsaw were 5 stars. I might have said different ratings throughout this video, so I don't know if I was right then or I'm right now, but that's how I feel at the end of this whole experiment. It was fun. I found some authors I'll definitely read more from. I picked up books I never would have. Loved books I probably wouldn't have picked up. Read some of the most popular things of the year and didn't enjoy them, but like it's nice to see what all the hype was about. And let me know what you thought about any of my feelings about these books. Share any of your feelings about these books, and I will chat with you down below. Bye!